All right, so you guys have spent some time outside, and some classes got this information already about types of observations. Some groups did not, so I want to make sure that it's available to everybody. And if you didn't get types of observations in your notes and the slides that are to come in your notes, you want to make sure to do that. Add that to your science notebook. So when we look at a picture like the one in front of you, quantitative versus qualitative observations we might make. For example, if I look at this fuzzy leaf, this light green fuzzy leaf, or these shiny chrysalises, those are describing qualities that these objects have. That would be qualitative observations that I'd be making. If I say there's one leaf, or there are two chrysalises here, then I'm talking about a quantity, an amount. So whenever you use numbers in your description, like it's roughly 2 feet tall, or using some kind of numerical description, it has 3 petals, whatever it might be that has numbers, is a quantitative observation. So scientists rely on both in biology. So quantitative always involves numbers, counting or measurement. Qualitative involves your non-numerical descriptions like color, shape, and texture, for example. All right, we can also talk about direct versus indirect. Direct versus indirect observation. So direct kind of makes sense. It's something you witness firsthand. You actually see it. So for example, maybe you see clouds roll in while you're outside, and those dark clouds actually are starting to show raindrops falling from the sky on you. So you could directly observe rain. However, you might also indirectly observe rain. How would that look? Well, indirect observations require us to do some inferring, or something called generate an inference. We do that from direct evidence, direct clues. So for example, if I wake up in the morning and my driveway is wet and full of puddles, I didn't see it rain, but I can infer that it rained. Or maybe I was awakened by thunder and lightning in the middle of the night, but I was too sleepy to actually look out and see it. But that could also be a clue that allows me to infer that it rained last night. So indirect observations are also important in science. So we look at clues, and one indirect observation I made out on the trail yesterday, the clue was that I saw a bunch of feathers scattered on the trail. So my inference might be that previously a bird might have been preyed upon by some other bird or some other animal, and a bunch of feathers are left over. So I wasn't there to see it, I didn't see it directly, but I'm inferring, and so it's an indirect observation that maybe predator-prey situation occurred out on the trail. All right, so you spent time observing an organism outside, or were supposed to describe an organism and try to figure out what its identity is. So where does your organism fit? What kind of organisms do we have in biology? Mostly we understand plants and animals, but we're going to talk a little bit about the categories of living things. As I mentioned before in class, there's about 1.3 million species that have been named. So each one of those that have been named has a 2-part scientific name. Most of us don't know scientific names because they're mostly used just by scientists for communication purposes, so that they know which species that they're referring to. But that 2-part scientific name actually is part of a larger classification system that has 8 levels, or 8 categories. So we're going to outline those categories that you probably learned about in 7th grade and elementary school But for most people, they're content using common names like the black-capped chickadee here. A scientific name is going to have two parts. It's going to be, if it's typed in italics, and the first part will be capitalized, the second part will be lowercase. So Poecile atricapillus. Not easy to pronounce compared to black-capped chickadee, but a scientist will be able to know you're referring to this particular bird by having, because no other bird is going to have this exact scientific name. Alright, so larger groups are categories. So when scientists are categorizing, you start with the big picture look first. So you can look at this set of pictures and you probably recognize plants, and the bird down there is an animal. And up in the right corner, fungus, a couple different kinds of fungus. So those are the larger multicellular organisms that are easiest for us as biologists to see. We don't always need special tools to be able to observe them. So here there's three kingdoms represented. Plant kingdom, the fungus kingdom, the animal kingdom. So hopefully you already know about those kingdoms. What other categories should you know? When we're classifying living things, well, we want to know that there's more than animals, fungus, and plants. So we'll spend some time exploring protists, which are almost all single-celled organisms, and we will find examples of those in pond water when we do a study a little bit later. And then we can also talk about bacteria. A little harder for us to visualize because they're even smaller than protists. But we'll have some time learning about bacteria. Probably won't spend much time on this kingdom of Archaea, but they are an ancient type of bacteria that ended up getting their own category because they did have some morphology in their cell wall that was unique compared to the regular bacteria. So just note, there are 6 kingdoms, general groups of life, that we might explore. And the very first and most general category is called a domain. And domain, the domain name for the kind of cells that we have, kind of organisms that we are, being animals, are called eukarya. And it actually has to do with the type of cell that we have. And so we'll talk about different types of cells when we get to the cells unit, but these have eukaryotic cells, and these organisms have prokaryotic cells. So they end up getting grouped in domains, partly based on the type of cell that they have. So every organism that we know the name of, we can categorize from its most general group, the domain, down to its species name. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories, 8 levels to our categorization system. Kingdom, class, genus, and species will be the ones that we spend the most time on. We might spend a little time talking about families and orders, but I want everyone to understand the different kingdoms and why they're different from one another. Some of the classes, like mammals versus birds, reptiles versus amphibians, and then genus and species and how that ties to a scientific name. So the black-capped chickadee is eukarya, eukaryotic cells, animal, because it moves around, looks for food. It's multicellular. It has a backbone, so it's in the phylum Chordate, just like us. It has feathers. It's warm-blooded. It has a beak with no teeth. It's warm-blooded. So it's in the class Aves, and that's category for all the birds. Different types of birds might be categorized into smaller groups called orders. The perching birds are all in an order called Passeriformes. The family name for the chickadee is Paridae. One interesting thing about the family names end in DAE. So that's how you can usually identify a family name for a species, is by the DAE ending. And Poaceae, the genus, Atricapilus, the species. Collectively, Poaceae atricapilus is the scientific name. So, just a little introduction to categories of organization for living things, kind of broad look at those types of things that we might be exploring this year. So, make sure you've gotten these in your notes, and we'll be having a quiz coming up soon. So, make sure you've gotten what you need in